Life is full of conflicts, and difficult conversations are almost never about just the facts, right? It's about the feelings involved, the perceptions that we have of one another in addition to the situation itself. And so the art of difficult conversations is a course that we've created to explore the many ways that you can engage with polarized issues, long-standing conflicts, and places in your life that you've been avoiding simply because you don't know how to approach the conversations that you need to have. Today, we're going to introduce one of the labs that we run as part of this class. But first, I want to take a second to introduce the co-teachers, Sarah Ness and Alexander Viner.
Hello, everybody. We wanted to run this lab because it is an exercise that's going to be available for our students throughout the course. This and a related lab called Facilitation Fear Lab will be extras you can drop in on every week as an adjunct to your class. And the idea of the whole course is to give you better tools for having polarized conversations, conflict conversations, the sort of things that oftentimes we put off with people in our life until there's a crisis, and then they kind of come out sideways. Like, oh my gosh, dad's about to die. I have to tell him all the things that I never told him before. Or I'm about to break up with my partner. Time to finally have that conversation. If we could talk about some of those things earlier on, I think it would save us a lot of pain and suffering, but oftentimes we don't because we don't have the tools. So in the art of difficult conversations, we give you a whole ton of tools to read people's conversational styles and interact with them, play with the power, status, and authority between you and other people, deal with your own dysregulation in the moment and trigger, and have basic relational tools and skills that will kind of give you superpowers for engaging with any difficult interaction.
Yeah, and something I really love about this exercise, but other exercises like it, is that it's like honing a tool and a skill set that you can use in pretty much every aspect of your life. So, a lot of the time, I mean, we all have those conversations in our lives, like Sarah was just saying, where we're avoiding them. We don't know how to approach them is often the reason. And often we have them in our heads after we kind of had an interaction with someone. We kind of have some kind of imaginary exchange. And of course, that doesn't really work that well because what we really need is to be in a relational process with other people. And so this kind of exercise you do with other people, which is of course why we've created a course. It's about using each other's wisdom and insight into a situation to actually help practice. Okay, how am I going to approach that situation? Whether it's in my family, with friends, around a political issue, whatever it might be. So it's pretty universal as well. So I'm going to hand back to Geoff to actually talk a little bit more about what it is we're doing.
Yeah, so today we're going to run Difficult Conversations Lab. And the Difficult Conversations Lab is kind of the heart of a lot of the Art of Difficult Conversations course. It's a container that we have created where we can come to practice our skills. So if the rest of the class is kind of like the learning experience, Difficult Conversations Lab are very much the dojo, right? They're the sparring studio that we're going to practice those skills. So we're going to do a quick layout. I'm going to introduce exactly how this process runs. And then Sarah and Alexander are going to pick a topic and actually run the lab live today. Yeah, look how excited they are. So the Difficult Conversations Lab is a closed container with a really particular intention. The participants are going to come in this case, Sarah and Ali, are going to come in, and each one of them is going to give us a topic of conversation, or more specifically, a particular conversation, difficult conversation that they need to have in their lives, whether they've had it or they've tried having it before unsuccessfully. We're going to talk about the circumstance of the situation itself, the concern that we're trying to address, why are we having this conversation at all, and then get really specific about the other person that you're going to have this difficult conversation with. And to keep it simple, we're going to stay with just one person that we're having this conversation with. And it's really important to get a pretty active profile of that one person. How do they present? What's their language like? Are there specific phrases that they commonly use? Are there specific conversational tactics that they really use? And this is important because creating that profile helps the other person or you yourself inhabit their character in a way that feels natural and realistic. so we can really play with the situation itself. From that point, we're going to launch into actually having the conversation. As the person bringing the conversation, you have two options for the first round of this conversation. You can either try to play your role the first time, or, and sometimes this is significantly more impactful for me, I try to inhabit the other person I'm having the conversation with. So I'm role playing from their perspective. So I really get to understand what it's like to be them, what feelings and approaches and values they're bringing to the table, what frustrations they have that's making this conversation so difficult for me. So you can do one of those two things in the first round. We're going to play through that first round, then we'll have a quick debrief, and then we'll run through it a second time, having had that debrief. In the midst of this conversation, both sides of it, you always have the option to pause. So either person in the conversation can pause. And we just use this easy timeout, universal timeout symbol. We'll pop out of the conversation real quick. And you can either clarify to the person that's trying to play either you or the other person, like, actually, I would do more of this, or actually, they would do more of this, or could you try doing? This will help to keep the conversation as realistic as possible. You may also hit a point where you're just feeling triggered and you just don't want to keep going, or this isn't working. So at any point, you can pause this conversation just using the timeout, and then we'll just time back in when we're ready to keep going. Another thing that we can use is just bring more. Like if you need more conflict, bring the conflict up. If someone's going a little too hard, bring the conflict down a little bit. So these are just some universal symbols that we use as part of the Difficult Conversations Lab. We can get into a little bit more explanation when we get to the actual debrief of how that thing happens. But mostly what we're doing is we're pulling out for active information, like what did we see here? What did we see each other trying? What do we celebrate? What will we change before we go into a second run of that conversation? And each one of these trials should really not last more than 3 to 4 minutes. And we modify the length of these depending on the situation that we're running the lab inside of. So, Sarah, Ali, do you have any questions?
I don't think so. Let's try it.
Yeah, I'm good.
Fantastic. Does one of you have a conversation that you'd like to get us all started out with?
I got one.
Bring it on, Sarah.
So I have an active conflict with one of my landmates, neighbor, housemate, whatever. I'm going to call her housemate for simplicity. We live in separate houses on the same property. And I'm going to try to think of how to make this simple. Let's call her Anne for short. There was a conflict on the property that stemmed. Relationships are difficult, so I'm like figuring out where to condense this. There was a conflict on the property that stemmed in part from something I did. I was cooking in the kitchen past quiet hours, and it caused a lot of, it interrupted the sleep of one of our housemates that she is really close to and protective over. Me doing that, and then another of our housemates also doing that, like caused a big upset and got really, really protective. And it caused a lot of changes. Like nobody can be in the house after 10 p.m. now, even though it's a common house, and like there's separate fridges for food. And it just like really, it blew up, and there wasn't a lot of like mutual conversation about it. Like there were attempts from another housemate at creating a group conversation. Like, let's talk about this together. Let's figure out what happened. Let's work through solutions that all of us could be in on. But Anna and her husband had kind of like just been like, this is a violation. We have a boundary here. It's not up for discussion. So that was one part of it. And in trying to communicate to me why she was pulling away, because Anne and I have been really close friends, she sent a message where she also brought up a lot of things from the past that she had been upset about in our connection, in a way that felt like a violation to me. Like, I didn't ask for this feedback. You have a lot of kind of projections about me that you haven't checked. Some of it was professional as well as personal. And it's led me to a place where I'm like, it's been about a week and a half since then. She just got back from a trip. I know that in the next day or two, I probably should have a conversation with her, to try to like because right now I've just literally just been like hiding in my house and like not going anywhere near the common areas of the property, which is a reactive, it's me being reactive. Um, but I think I have some fear that I think my fears are like, if I do, she'll take the moral high ground, just be like, this was a thing that you did wrong. And it's kind of like, I'm not open to hearing other views on it. Or kind of be very reasonable in a way that doesn't feel reasonable to me. Like she's an extremely intelligent, like well-reasoned and like motherly person. And it's easy for me to kind of be like, oh, I did something wrong. Like I can go into my child when I'm with her. And I think I'm scared of doing that.
I love the context that you're setting here, Sarah. I'm wondering, in this conversation, is there a win scenario, right? Is there something that you want out of this conversation? What's the concern that we're trying to either address or resolve?
What do I want? It's funny that I don't think of that in advance. I mean, I think I'd like to have a path. That's funny. There's like all sorts of little things in my head, and I'm like, what is the one that I actually want? Is it like to be heard? Is it to be acknowledged? Is it? But I think it's like I want a path to repair with her. I want like to define what our relationship is. I want to like know if the judgment she has of me, how that impacts the extent to which she wants to be friends and housemates still. And I just kind of want a path to like move forward and repair and figure out how to engage on the property. Because it's like, if she doesn't really want to be friends and housemates, like it's actually fine with me to spend most of my time in my own home. I feel really safe here.
Okay.
I'm questioning these other parts of me that's like, there's a part that's like, I want her to know the impact that like what happened had on the property, because like I don't know if she knows the extent to which some of us are like, not even me, but actually some other housemates are like, maybe we leave now. But then I'm like, that's not the primary goal.
At some point, Sarah, we'll get into too much, I think, environmental information here that's going to cloud us being able to actually have the conversation. So I think that keeping it to, I think you've done a really fantastic job of setting up a very difficult conversation and conflict that you're having in your life. And I think that we've got a pretty decent profile of the person as well. Do you have a sense of, for the first run through, whether you would like to play as yourself or you'd like to try role playing Anne?
It feels harder to role play Anne. So I think let me start with that, because it'll also give y'all a sense of how she acts and interacts instead of me having to explain all of that.
Wonderful. In that case, Ali, you're going to be playing Sarah. Do you have any clarifying questions for her?
You've got a couple. I've got a couple of questions about Anne, which were in my head, but I'm going to sit on those because I want to. You might answer them, like you said, through your role play. I suppose what what I'm most curious about from your perspective is the stance you were thinking of taking. You know, is it conciliatory? Do you feel a need to apologize, or is it a more neutral space you're coming from of, hey, I really want to try and repair and talk this through? So I'm curious where you're at emotionally as you consider, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with Anne.
My MO is to be reasoned with a lot of unexpressed anger inside that at some point may like come out sideways.
I'm like that too sometimes,
So
so
if you just
I
want to
can
repress
totally
your
embody
emotions a lot and seem reasonable on top of it, you're probably going to be pretty accurate.
that. Great. I don't even have to try that hard to do that, so that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm actually a little bit in between where it's like, I don't know, uh, I don't know which of those to lead with, whether that's like kind of the truth is like, I don't know whether to lead with here is my emotion, and I like want to be able to express the anger that I have about this situation, or to lead with like, let me understand your point of view more. So it might even be like, I think I would probably start the situation by like checking in on which of us wants to share that.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I think if I started conciliatory, and then the anger probably would start coming out at some point, where I would just get like kind of almost what seems unreasonably angry at some point.
Hmm. Fair enough. Yeah, that's useful. Thank you.
All right. Well, it sounds like we've got enough information to get started here. Um, Sarah, would you feel comfortable doing a 3-minute run for this first run through the conversation, or do you think you need longer?
I think I'd prefer to just go until we need to pause, either if it feels like one of us is stuck, me or Ali, or if it feels like the scenario has kind of like played out. But I'd say if it's gone 3 minutes and we haven't hit the peak yet, like let us know, and I'll try to speed it up a bit.
Okay. Just to take me out of field of view here, I'm going to go ahead and pop off of video and audio, but I'm going to be in the space. If you guys need me, I can pop back on at any time. And
Dad's leaving.
yeah, Dad's leaving the room. He's going to be right outside of your view though, right? Uh, so I'll let you two get the conversation started, and if I really feel like I've got to step in, I'll pop back on. Of course, you can always ask me to return.
Awesome.
Thanks.
And fine.
Okay. Hey, Anne. So I've been wanting to have a conversation with you for maybe a couple of weeks because I feel like a lot of the stuff that came up with the kitchen situation and the common areas, I just feel like it's not fully resolved. So I wanted to see, are you open to having a conversation about it?
Sure, we can go for a walk.
Okay, that's okay for me. I can do that. So yeah, I suppose. I don't know if you're aware that a lot of it's caused a lot of conflict in the community, and I know that you're coming from a place where for you it was pretty firm boundaries, but I felt like there's not a lot of space to have a conversation because I feel like you've I feel like it's been difficult to have a conversation because it's just been like the kind of rules are rules, and I feel like it needs a bit more than that. I think we need to talk about it a bit more.
I We've talked about it a lot already, and you've continuously violated the boundaries that we set in the main house. And I don't think it's worth talking about more. If you can't keep to the agreements that we've set together, then I don't know how we can be good housemates and good landmates. And so I just need to have a boundary up for a while. And I need you to respect that.
It's not that I don't respect the boundary. It's just that I feel like some there's something happening where the boundary is creating a lot of uncertainty in the community. And if we can have boundaries, but if we can't talk about the boundaries, like I don't feel you very open right now to talking about where that boundary is set. I feel like you just kind of set the boundary, and there's nothing to do except to either accept it or then we're gonna just fight.
And that might be how it is for a while. Like we might just not get along for a while and need to not have contact with each other until you can learn to respect that boundary.
Yeah, I don't know, when you say that it makes me feel kind of shut down a bit because it's not that I'm not saying I'm not going to respect the boundary. I'm saying that we can have the boundary and still talk about it in a way where it doesn't have this knock-on effect with the whole community because people are feeling quite people are feeling kind of shut down by it. They feel a bit constricted by it because it's like the rules have changed. We have the 10 p.m. curfew. It's just
The
for
rules have
me those.
There was always a 10 p.m. curfew that you continuously violated. And now Stephen, who was trying to sleep in the house, he almost got to the verge of wanting to leave the property. And I don't think that's fair to him to have his sleep interrupted.
I get that. and it's not that I'm saying that he should have his sleep interrupted, and I am sorry that I interrupted his sleep, and I think we've had that conversation already, but I feel like right now we're in a position where I feel like I'm just gonna, well, like our relationship is not in the greatest place, and I know you said some stuff when this all came out that I actually found pretty hurtful, and I feel like there's just a distance between us right now, and maybe that's something you want. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely feel distance between us, and it feels necessary at the moment, and I want that to be okay. I still care about you, but I think that for a while we just need to have less contact.
I suppose that's, I guess that's something that, I have to respect that, and that's okay. I'm okay with having less contact. I guess what I'm asking you to consider is just beyond the two of us, how it impacts everyone else. And so I guess it'd be helpful to know whether that's just a stance you want to be in forever. Is that limited for you?
I don't know what the timeline on it will be. I know that we need to hold this for a while, and at some point, maybe we'll be able to come back and renegotiate. But right now, this is how it is. And you can pause.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck.
I had exactly the same moment of pause right there. Yeah, yeah.
Jeez, that's hard to hold.
I found the reasonableness really hard. I found the reasonableness really hard to deal with. I felt really, I could understand when you talked about kind of going to the inner child, because it's just like, oh, it's a tough one. It was a tough one. I felt constricted is how I felt from your position there. I felt I was being pushed into a smaller box. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems so reasonable. Um, ooh, that hurt to hold for some reason. I noticed in holding it, there wasn't a lot of, like, I was very sure that I was going to hold my position and not be changed in it. Like, I was sure that I was right, but not from like, it wasn't even what I imagined it would be, which is like a place of moral rightness. It was almost like I am right in myself and I am aligned with myself, and that is the most important thing. Like Anne has a lot of, I think she has a lot of trouble setting boundaries. Like she's usually pretty easygoing, but when she hits a boundary, it's like there is no fucking way around it. Um, the thing that hit me most that you said, like the moment I most felt something was when you said, like, I feel like the relationship between us is not that good and there's some distance there. I think that got me in part because it was a bit of a frame shift away from the like, let's talk about the facts of the house, which I felt really clear on.
Mhm.
And it also was like oh, this is something I might actually care a bit about. Um, but something about you explaining your position was just like getting me more entrenched in mine because I was like, there are no degrees of movement. And then you bringing up the house, I think I almost dismissed because it was secondhand. And I think in that mode, I was like, I only care about things that are like here and now and between us. It was almost like I didn't believe you. Like I felt like you were trying to bolster your position.
Yeah, that's super. And in a way, I guess I was. That's really interesting because I noticed I've obviously, it felt a little bit more like a connection moment in me when I was like, our relationship, and that also the hurt of like, what she said afterwards. And it's making me think what's coming up for me right now is that the way in I took was a way in that was a pretty difficult way for it to go anywhere because I came in with the situation and trying to appeal various different appeals, like appeal to the community, appeal to this and that felt very, like you said, like solid. So I would almost want to go in with the hey, we used to be close, and I totally get your position on this, but I'm feeling really hurt around this situation, and I just wanted you to know that without putting any pressure on her to have to, like, that something resonates in me around like not asking her to take that boundary away, because if it's hard to set them in the first place, then like that
Yeah.
there's no, hey, I'm not trying to shift your boundary, I'm just trying to communicate how I feel. That feels like a much more fruitful place.
I'm going to do two pullouts just to like talk about this from course content. And Joff, I'd love you to do the same. But two things I'm noticing in it are like, or three things. One is like, um, identifying what her actual concern is. Cause I was like, I don't know if her actual concern is something like keeping the property together. Because she's kind of like, if people are trespassing boundaries, like that is a no, whether or not it impacts the property. But I do think she might have a concern for our relationship. So that was one where you hit that. Another one is like power. Like if we think about status, it's like we have she has more authority. So status, power, and authority. Status is like the power that you have that other people give you, like trust. It's like how are people in relation to each other. Authority is like the role that you have over others, and power is like the resource power. So technically Allison has more authority because she's an owner on the property and I'm not, and that can make me feel kind of small, but she's like taking more status than me in those interactions, and I think I'm letting her do it. So there's a way that like I wonder if there are ways for me to kind of gain back some status, which I want to think about. And then the last one is relating languages, which we'll talk about, that there are like the kind of more receptive, like questioning, observing languages, and then there are the more expressive storytelling, directing. It was like you were largely in storytelling and I was kind of in this like directing, sort of like I have kind of an authority on truth sort of mode is what it felt like. And she and like a little bit more observing, and she kind of like goes into those experiential modes.
Mm.
And I noticed she wasn't doing much storytelling about her experience, and you weren't doing much questioning about her experience. And I was like, oh, I wonder if there's a way to switch languages a little bit where you could use questioning and I could explain more of my view, and maybe that would cause me to de-escalate a little bit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then there's also this, yeah, that, well, I was actually going to ask about the what is the context of ownership and power in the community, because that felt very important even as you were explaining it. So that's very useful to know. But there's also something around your relationship and being curious and questioning and trying to understand that more deeply. Also, in a way, it doesn't mean any of that status or power stuff isn't there, but it somehow lessens it because it starts to become a different type of relationship, I think. Because as soon as it go into the storytelling, then it's like, oh yeah, well, bam, 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 and all the different contexts and the ownership and whatnot. It's much easier for that to come into it, I think. So that, yeah, I think that's interesting.
Yeah,
There are a couple
there's
things that I'm seeing here.
yeah.
Um, One, it didn't feel like the getting on the same concern, like being on the same page for what we're trying to accomplish together in this conversation ever really happened.
Mm,
So there was a lot of meandering that occurred here, and it seemed like the concern kept shifting without it being explicit. Like we're addressing one thing, now we're addressing something entirely different. We kind of went all over the board. So I think that like getting at least an understanding of a concern that we can both agree to be working on together could probably be a way to productively move in one direction. Sarah, that something that you brought up was the power imbalance. And could have an argument that actually she doesn't necessarily have more authority. She has more direct, specific power because she has the resource that you need. And the authority is something that you're granting her. So that position of owner, well, she does own the property, but that doesn't mean that she necessarily has to have more authority in the situation. She is taking status in this conversation. And there are a number of ways I think you could pretty easily bring that status down, or at least level yourselves here. Two things that come to mind immediately, and this is taking two completely different tacks, just knowing your background, is one, you wrote a dissertation on community living, right? You understand the mechanics of why communities fail, and they fail all the time. So you have actual status and actual authority, having done that thing and done the research on the thing and dedicating years of your life to knowing it. The other thing that would probably be more useful here, I think, especially knowing a little bit more about the background of Anne, is your family. You've known each other for 5 years. You've chosen each other and each other's family, and you've each seen each other through way harder things than someone's in the kitchen too late. You've decided to co-inhabit a piece of property together. You have operated and run programs and businesses together. You had each other's backs for years and years. And the status of that relationship and your place inside of it as a member of her family that has continually chosen and supported her can award you a lot of status here. I'm seeing this kind of ring around the rosy thing that keeps happening, where because the concern keeps shifting, we don't know what context is going to produce the content that we need. And as such, it makes it really hard to get underneath whatever it is that Anne is having a real problem with. Like, what is the real concern that Anne has here? And I have a suspicion that it's probably one or two really particular values that are coloring her perspective and perception of the situation. And I think that if we can really get to whatever that true value is, we can begin having a productive dialogue. Because I have this assumption that you probably hold the same value, but you're seeing it a different way. So those things all feel real to me. And I think that without addressing some of those mechanics, this conversation is either not going to be fruitful, or there's no way to really anticipate how it's going to go, because it can go any direction.
Yeah, I'm feeling strongly that like you said, Sarah, her concern being around your relationship, or at least some of her concern, and actually the content getting clear. And what Joff just said, I think makes sense. We were kind of going around. I think an approach, and I'd be up for trying this if you're up for round two around this, like an approach where we keep the same roles, but with where I, as you, make a clear approach around a shared context of your relationship with each other, and that then also they're addressing the concern of, or trying to find the concern, deepen a kind of understanding of what is her concern around your relationship particularly, because we're very clear on what the concern is around the rules and whatever that is. I don't think that's the main thing going on in any case.
All right. Let's try it again. I think I would like to switch roles if you're okay with it, Ali, because I want to,
Yeah.
also for the purposes of showcasing what usually happens in lab. So I'm just playing a couple things in my head that I could work with.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm gonna tap into
Before we dive directly into that, Sarah, I want to see, Ali, do you have any clarifying questions about playing Anne that didn't get covered by that first role play?
Let me have a think. Yeah, I actually want to know a little bit a bit more about the working relationship that you had and how that crosses over, not with a huge amount of detail, but how does that cross over with your personal relationship? Like how closely did you work together, or do you work together?
I'm literally teaching a class for her right now, which has also gotten complicated because, like, one reason we need to resolve the conflict is the next session of that class is coming up. And right now I'm like, I don't feel comfortable teaching that if I don't know that you respect me professionally. I think we've worked together in the past. She has taken a lot of the tools from authentic relating into a more professional context. So she's used the tools. I hosted, part of where some of our conflict started is I hosted an event on the property that like didn't go well, where she felt like it got really chaotic in the preparations. And like, I think she felt like the values that she was holding and the like kind of degree of preparation she needed just didn't get listened to. And I didn't understand it. And I didn't get curious enough until it was too close to the event to do anything about it. And so I think there's that history. I think she just generally feels unsafe with the degree of preparation that I do and the degree of kind of chaos and like laissez-fairness that I hold, because she's very high order. She's what do you call it in magic? She's like orderly good and I'm chaotic neutral or something.
That's really helpful. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That fills in a lot of gaps.
Yeah.
She's definitely holding the lawful good here.
Lawful good. Yeah.
Yeah, lawful good. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like what It's funny, it's like the professional bit, it's almost like there's a couple different concerns here. Joff is correct. And one of the main concerns is like you delivered professional feedback in like a format that wasn't asked for and in
Mm.
a way that was very painful. Um, but largely because like I did make a lot of changes in response to her first round of feedback she gave after that retreat, and she didn't like ask about that or clarify or check or anything. Um, and she like was pretty hyperbolic in the way that she
Mhm.
talked about the effect of her feedback this time. So there's part of me that's just like, I just need to express like how much that hurt. But I think the underlying concern in all of this, if I'm going to be really selfish and honest, is like, do you actually still want to be family with me? Like,
Mm.
you have all of these judgments of me, and like I can't, like, there a lot of them are accurate. Like, we have different personalities around this. Um, and I can't promise that I'm not going to forget things or hurt her again. And we've had that conversation before. And in the past, she's kind of been like, I love you anyways. And I'm like, but is that true now? Like, you're married to someone who's quite judgmental as well. And I think that's pushing you more towards that side. And like, and the thing that had often connected us most, which was her daughter and my goddaughter, passed away. So like we don't have that bond anymore. And so I think on some level, independent of the property, I'm like, does my opinion matter to you? Like, do
Mm.
you care if I have a different opinion here? Because I just don't know. And if she doesn't, then like nothing I can say is going to change that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I can makes it a little bit easier to tune into, well, where I imagine her position might be, so that's useful. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just have a question mark up. Um, I imagine she would say that she still cares about me and I'm still family, but I don't know. I kind of don't know to what extent it would be true. So I guess I have some questions about how she views family too.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is good shit and hard and good preparation. So I'm
Yeah,
grateful.
yeah, yeah, it's a vulnerable space.
Okay. We try one more time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sarah, I'm noticing that there's a lot of activation for you. Do you want to take a couple breaths before we get started so that you're actually starting into this conversation as opposed to starting the conversation with the meta
Yeah.
or the frame around it? I don't know if it's helpful or not, but it might be useful to remember that right now all you have is a story.
Yeah.
Right? Until you've had this conversation, that's all it is. It's just a narrative. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get a little bit more clarity about how you can serve that relationship and clarify what the actual experience is.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
try not to live too far into this narrative that we're creating and this story that we're erecting around it.
All right, let's time in. Okay. Um, I know we've had some tension lately, and I'm glad we had a little bit of space. Um, but I also would just like love to talk with you about what's happened between us and what's happened on the property. Because I don't need to clear everything, but I do want to feel in right relationship with you, even if that relationship involves some distance right now. Um, I'm curious if you're open to that.
Yeah, sure, I'm open to that. And why don't we go for a walk? We can talk about it. And yeah, there has been some distance. It's a distance I was pretty clear that why I needed that. And then also in terms of the house, I think I was pretty clear on why that was a violation of our agreements, our rules. And of course I'm open to talking and hearing how you're feeling. I feel I don't feel right now a need to necessarily repair anything in some ways because I feel like I think it was pretty cut dry what I was expressing around what happened in the kitchen.
Yeah. Um, I get that in your world, there have been a couple violations from my side and a couple places that you feel like your values and the values that you feel are fair to hold on the property have just not been met. And me cooking late in the kitchen and what happened between us on the ALT. And it feels like, um, I guess I just don't know how to come back to repair on those, or if at this point you want repair with me. Because I get that apologies aren't sufficient. Um, and I guess I'm curious, like, I know that you want space right now, and I'm happy to honor that. Um, and I'm curious if you have a desire for or a path forward to repair relationally between us. That's a desire I have, at least to know where we stand.
Sure, of course I always want us to be connected and close. Like I said, I need that distance and space. Like I said to you, and I feel frustrated because I feel like I've expressed myself and you haven't around a few things and you haven't listened to me about where my boundaries are and what I really value and the kind of structure I need. And I feel like the kitchen was an example where you didn't listen to what my boundary was for, and that's so. I guess what matters to me is that if we're gonna be close, that you listen to me,
Mm.
and I don't know if I'm being heard even. Yeah,
I imagine that's like not just understanding what your value is, but also like respecting it more.
yeah, it's a respect thing. It's definitely part of it. Part of it's a respect thing, and feeling feeling like when I say something, if you don't do it, that makes me feel. I guess you could say that makes me feel disrespected.
Yeah. I think like I notice myself kind of wanting to go small and apologize right now. And I know that also like the apologies don't work. And we've explored before like the ways in which I can be chaotic and the effect that has on you. So I think I want to tell you like some of the changes that I've made since you gave some of that feedback. Cause sometimes I know it doesn't look like I'm changing as a result. So like I have, since the ALT, I've decided not, or I'm not going to hold more events on the property until at least it feels like safe to you, for me to do so. And if I do, I'll have like more clear conversations about what the expectations are. Um, I've also stepped out of my leadership roles in general. Like if I can't control the degree of chaos that I have, I don't want to be, and I can't see the shadow behind it. I don't want to be kind of putting that on other people, but I do want to name that like I think that has a negative impact on a lot of the people that I serve for me to step out of that. So like I respect your opinion enough to make that move. Um and I know you said you feel like I don't see the shadow that I have, and so it feels like the most respectful thing I can do is step away until I can see that shadow. Um and I've, haven't been going into the main house almost at all to make sure that I keep the boundary of post 10 p.m. But it makes me feel a little bit like I'm getting smaller and smaller in an attempt to make sure that I don't step over any lines. And I don't want to do that in my relationship with you. And I like don't really want to do that in my relationship with the world. And so I'm curious if you can help me find a way that I can make sure that I hold these values of care for other people that I know we both share and integrity without trying to take myself out of the picture. I'm curious if you have
I,
ideas.
I don't, I appreciate you saying it, firstly. I think I don't have ideas right now, and I definitely still need to feel that respect and that distance that you're giving, but I do believe in you, and I do think that you're, from what you're saying, that you're taking it seriously, and that feels good to hear. And so it's definitely something I'm open to exploring. I don't have ideas right now, but it does help to hear that. And hopefully that helps to hear.
Um, that was cool. It felt like that was progress.
Mm.
I didn't expect myself to say that, but I was keeping in mind that idea of status and how much I was giving it up and being like, I need to take status in order to be able to give some to her as well. And by naming the impact on me of trying to align to her values and the effect that her words had had on me, it felt like I kind of stood up a little straighter in myself.
Mm. Yeah, it was really interesting when you said that. It was almost like there was a tip when you were talking about normally I might go small and apologize at this point, but I am feeling this. It felt very clean and it did feel like you standing straighter. And the response in me, it was very interesting because I have those qualities in myself that she has of being like quite judgmental and quite like rigid. I can, it's not so hard for me to feel into that mode. And from that mode, I felt respect when you said that, I felt a sense of like, okay, so which interestingly, it was all quite subtle, but the feeling was, I'm going to listen to you now more, which was interesting because we had this whole theme of who's listening to who, and I felt myself listening to you more and going like, okay, okay, and it strangely it opened something a little bit, or a decent amount, actually, I would say. So that was really interesting for me to observe myself.
Yeah, it was really cool to like bypass everything else and just stick to my concern, which was the relationship, and keep in mind the status and kind of ask myself in a way like, what sort of relationship do I want to have with her? Because I don't want to be like mother child. I like we are colleagues and peers in that realm. And I think that she would actually respect me more if I held to that in our relationship. And also if I'm worried about her taking the moral high ground, like I need to be a little bit more clear on the effect of that on me, because I think she does care about that.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, interesting here. And that is another thing I noticed when you said, I don't want to be basically making myself small in response to the world or all the property, etc. And while also being respectful, it opened a compassion because I think to want anyone to feel small would be quite. I don't think a lot of people would want that of someone that they care about. When you hear it in those terms, it shifts a little bit to be like, no, I don't want you to be cowering through the world. Of course, I don't want that for you. So it actually shifted something. It helped shift the rigidity a bit in me as I was listening to you say that. So yeah.
I'm like, okay, now I actually have to have the conversation. I'm like, I just had it. We're all good. And actually, to keep accountability, I'm going to message her right now, literally right now, while we're on the call with each other, and ask if she would be open to having a conversation later today.
Nice.
Sarah, while we're still here fresh, maybe are there particular strategies and takeaways that you want to record for yourself that you want to keep in mind while you're having that conversation?
Let me message her first, and then I'm happy to.
While Sarah's messaging, Joff, is there anything you noticed when you were observing us?
Uh, the second conversation, one felt a little bit more true to life. I think that there was more active revealing, which was really useful. So the transparency, I think, came through a lot for you, Ollie, in your role as Anne, and kind of helped shift the dial. So revealing things that I've done, revealing ways that I feel in this relationship, talking to the power and the status dynamic that seems to be occurring, all felt like they were really impactful by getting underneath to some core values that, regardless of whether or not this character actually holds. And I think that that was good in getting through to them to reorient them toward the relationship, as opposed to just like their righteousness around lawful good. Um, I like the redirect to the concern. So being really explicit about the concern and inviting someone into the concern, it made it much more of an opt-in conversation, which means if the concern was shifting, it was probably going to either need to be made explicit or at least could be made explicit that the concern was shifting as part of the dialogue, and also offered more relevant content as opposed to the conversation just kind of going all over the map. So it felt far more focused, it felt far more purposeful, and as a result, it felt more fruitful. And I think that played out, especially as I'm hearing both of you talk about the dialogue. It seems like it was much more fruitful because the information, the content that we were generating really addressed the concern. And that helped by setting that in the context. So
Yeah.
all things that I
That's useful.
witnessed, yeah, I just all around, I think there was significant improvement from the first round through the conversation. Both of you, it felt like we're acting really skillfully inside of your roles.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah, and what was interesting, and this is useful for this exercise, perhaps in general, when people are doing it, was hearing more about Anne's emotional reality a little bit, like asking if like getting more context, because then I could tap into those aspects of myself where I feel like that or where I have had a similar response in the past. And I think we all basically have enough of spectrum of human experience that we can at least like like you might do if you're playing a role in the theater or a film or whatever, you can tap into like, oh yeah, I've been there at least once, or I've been close to that and
Mhm.
I felt like that. And that made it easier. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to bear in mind, I guess. Like that makes it easier to go to that like emotional core rather than the first one was more of a caricature of like we're people in a situation. Instead, we got, I think, a little bit closer as we got more context into like we're people who feel a certain way, which is obviously both are true at the same time. But I think that the next one is a lot more fruitful for shifting the conversation somewhere.
It can be
Um,
fun to play with caricatures because you can get
mm,
extremes. But
yeah,
when you're
yeah,
trying to work an actual dialogue, yeah, you want to be dealing with persons as opposed to
yeah,
caricatures. I think, yeah, the second was much more, it felt true to form in that way. And I love what you're saying about that because realistically, it feels very true. Like if we can get an emotional profile and we can at least put forward some of the values, like I think speaking to the chaotic neutral and the lawful good was actually really useful. But if we can get under some core values that are probably going to show up as part of this conversation, that's also super useful because we know those values themselves aren't going to shift in a single conversation. So those are bedrock, right? Those are foundations for the
yeah.
conversation to occur on, and we can center some of the things that we're saying by referring back to those values. So I think that was fantastic as well. I don't know. Did you know that Anne really likes to go on walks and walk and talk? Did that even get mentioned?
No, but the bit Sarah, when I was playing Sarah, she said, "Why don't we go for a walk?" So that's why I said that because I thought, like,
Yeah,
I
it's a
guess
good
Anne
pickup.
does
I
that.
was like, ooh, good
Yeah,
detail, catch Alley.
Yeah. That's,
yeah.
um,
Um,
I
yeah. So I sent her a message. Just want to celebrate that.
hold on,
good work.
hold on.
Yeah, I know that sometimes these labs can almost seem like the substitute for the conversation, and I really like want to keep that. I think the things that I want to keep in mind since you asked Jeff are like that my concern is primarily about my long-term relationship with her, and that like everything else about my feelings on the property stems from my relationships with people here. And that there's like a lot of extraneous things that at some point I want to talk with her about, like the effect of her relationship with her husband and the disconnect between her husband and me and how that affects our relationship and like the details about the house and all that sort of thing. But like the primary thing is like, do we have enough commitment to want to keep connecting? And like, do you have respect for me? And what, and like holding, and also like that I'm giving status and authority and basically placing myself as power under to
Hmm.
her. And she hasn't ever asked me to play that role. And I think actually the most valuable thing I might be able to do in the conversation, and the thing that might even help our relationship most, is just to reset that and be like, I am going to stand for the ways in which I do listen to you, the ways in which I'm valuable in the world, like the value of our professional relationship, and just like not go small. And I think that might actually be a real turning point in our relationship in general.
It sounds like it's going to be a turning point one direction or another, but either way, it sounds like that's a healthier place for you to be living.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think so. And
yeah,
and not and like not get into defending my view of what happened on the property or being overly apologetic. I thought what you said about like me needing to respect the actions and not just the words, Ali, is something that feels very true in that connection. And I can't prove to her that I'm going to respect the actions, but I can prove to her that her words have had an effect on my actions,
mm-hmm.
Mhm.
That's a good point.
which feels like going along with her value and concern, which I think underlying is something like, do you change your behavior at all from the things that I say?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. That feels, yeah, I agree with Joff there. It feels like a transitional point in that relationship, in your relationship with her, in some direction.
Mhm.
But yeah, it feels like movement. Feels like there's movement in terms of at least broadening out how you might approach it. So that's positive.
Yeah.
Are you feeling less apprehensive and avoidant about this conversation, Sarah?
No, I still feel terrified.
Oh, okay.
But I feel like I have a tool now, like I think both with the concern and the status, um, and also like a different form of storytelling. Because like in the relating languages, there's basically like a spectrum from internal to external in attention. And I think I've in the sort of storytelling that's explaining my position, I'm very much on the internal and like doing external storytelling that's like about her effect on me and being more relational feels like a really good thing to remember as well. So I feel like I've got a little bit better of a grasp on how I can use our own tools in that conversation. And it's just like, I think the thing I'm worried, the thing that's scary is like, it's hard to change conversational styles quickly. And there's part of me that's like, okay, I'm going to have to like probably take a lot of pauses in this conversation to make sure I have it in the way that I want. But that doesn't feel bad.
Hmm.
So there's a worry about slipping, but I know it's going to go way better than it would have before we did this lab. Yeah.
Right.
So if you want more stuff like this, come and join us for the course. Obviously, we find our own tools really valuable, and I think they're pretty ubiquitously helpful. And I don't really know of another course that does it with as much theory and as much practice as we try to.
Yeah, we didn't bring as much as much theory into this lab, I think, as we tend to front load the course with. But I think this is a pretty fantastic portrayal of the experiential side of what we're doing. While we do spend a decent amount of time in theory and didactic content, we have a really, really heavy emphasis on experiential learning and integration. And I think this type of lab, which runs over and over again throughout the course of our 8-week course, is a wonderful example of it. This is just the one that we come back to time and time again because we found it so fruitful.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say I think what's been beautiful about today and what I love about the course in general is everything is directly applicable to your life. So yes, this was an experiential example, but also the workbook, which is a piece of art in and of itself and packed full of theory. That it's not like about some abstract concept of talking to people. It's real life. I mean, this is like this is the deepest stuff of life is our relationship. So I think everything is directly applicable to our close relationships, but also just how we relate to the world, what's going on politically, how do we talk about those issues. So I can't wait for us to start up again. And
I'm
yeah,
looking
it's
forward to it too.
great to play today, guys, as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you, guys.
I love I love in these labs, but in general, the like disparate of different conversations that could show up in this space. Like one might be like an LLC or corporate partnership agreement, and one might be a marital dispute, and one might be a parenting conversation. Like we get so many different examples that the skill building becomes just it becomes wonderful. Yeah, it just feels directly applicable to almost every segment of life that people walk in with.
I
And
feel
this
like
is I've said it before, it's my favorite course to run. I love the work that we've done on this course, and Ali, I'm so excited to have you on board for teaching on regulation and self-care this round. I think it's going to be a fantastic course run, and I'm excited to be with everyone in it.
Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, this is The Art of Difficult Conversations with Alexander Biner, Geoff Crum, and Sarah Ness.
Wow.
Wow.